Welcome to another edition of Superconnectivity. I am your host, Charlie, the Professor Esser. With me, as always, is
Phil Perch.
Phil. Always glad to have you here. So let's talk things. One thing I wanted to mention. Now, of course, because there was a little bit of a slowness in posting. The last Superconnectivity I heard, which is about 2 weeks ago, I had gone into this whole thing about how algorithm, not a logarithm, an algorithm. Boy, was my face red when I heard myself say logarithm instead of algorithm. Oh, I know.
How dare you.
Cards and letters are still coming, I'm sure. An algorithm created by some scientist said Batman versus Superman isn't going to do, or had a 37% chance of turning a profit. Meanwhile, we got a tweet recently with a link to a Forbes article. Who sent us that, Phil?
Here, let me pull it up so I can get his name right. It was Kenneth Smyson.
Kenneth, thank you.
Yes.
Vigilant listener, Kenneth Smyson. No doubt of the Weehawk and Smysons. I don't know. Sent us a tweet from Forbes magazine basically explaining how, look, I know a lot of people are saying that Batman v Superman isn't going to do well, but rest assured it's going to do freaking pretty well. Now, I'm combining this with actually, I had heard a very interesting piece from 538 podcast on the, it actually wound up on the media, but it was of the 538 crew discussing various polls and issues with the presidency, and one poll or one analysis in particular of that had recently said that based on previous outcomes, Donald Trump had a 98 to 99% chance of being elected president. Which I think everyone read that and said, "What the what?" Because even if you're a Donald Trump supporter, you're going to be like, "Really? I don't think he has that much support." But basically, what Mr. Silver at 538 said was like, "Look, you can create very easily these retroactive." Algorithms that will predict things that says based on all these factors, this is what's going to happen. And you can make it look real fancy, but in truth, what it says is, any person with a name that rhymes with Lincoln gets elected president because, of course, you're looking at a relatively small sample size. Now, in the presidency, you're only looking at I have no idea how many. I think we're currently at 44 presidents, and even if you do 2 elections each, that's 88 presidents. You're looking at under 100 presidents for a sample size. Mm-hmm. You can find easy patterns. If you're looking at how much films that make a lot of money, if you pick the right qualities, you can create a logarithm or an algorithm. Keep on going to logarithm. You can create an algorithm that's going to show that the most likely. And by the way, I do not know what the actual mathematical difference between a logarithm and algorithm is. I'm just going to say that right up front now. But I do know that there is a difference, and that officially what we're discussing is an algorithm, not a logarithm. I think algorithms are predictive, and logarithms are sort of looking at what exactly is in existence. The pattern in existence is the logarithm. The pattern predictive is the algorithm. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that, math nerds, please make me feel humble. But that basically when you create this kind of a thing, you punch in your numbers and you're going to get an outcome, but that outcome isn't really as predictive as you think because you control the numbers you put in. Is essentially the short answer. Now you can do that manipulatively to create something that favors the outcome you want, or to get attention, or you can do that just innocently because you're looking at various factors that you think are important that may in fact not be that important. And the only way you can test your algorithm is to make a prediction and give an answer. So, for example, if this algorithm was really going to be good, you would have to have looked at Deadpool or some other film that was coming out, made a prediction about that, and seen if it was good. Just saying, well, this is our algorithm based on past performance. This is our predictions for the next couple of films. That's not really that's meaningless. That's as much as guessing. So, Brainiac may have tried to fool us, but apparently other people have jumped up and corrected us, as this gentleman at Forbes magazine very rightly did. And what they basically explain is, look, there is a lot of hype around this film. There's a lot of schadenfreude around this film, but let's walk it back a bit. Among places this thing is going to make its money back at, you have your ancillary items, which, of course, as we have said 100 times, as I say, it may not be true, but I say it every time, that Guardians of the Galaxy made its money back before the first ticket was sold, just on T-shirt sales alone. That just on licensing, Warner's is likely making a good chunk of its money back just from the licensing. Oh. The pre-sales are already very high. And so even if this film does not do that well, it's still going to make its money back. And truth be told, I don't think it's not going to do well.
Yeah.
I think that there is a lot of negative feeling about this in a lot of ways. There was a good reveal recently about it that puts me a lot more at ease. That basically the introduction of the Flash, introduction of Aquaman, etc. That all these things may come as a brief dream sequence that may be presented as essentially the Flash running backwards in time to try and warn. Basically to set up the Justice League film, trying to warn Batman and Superman of this impending doom of Darkseid. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting, although, goodness, why are you telling us that now? That's really kind of spoiling the film, kids. And I can see how that's that difficult a balancing act when you're dealing with the film, and you are trying to circumvent bad hype. And of course, bad hype is something you can't avoid. Even Marvel gets bad hype. They have basically suggested that, basically, here's what I'm going to say, which has been my takeaway since before. Regardless of how this film does, they've already started production on Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. They're setting dates for Justice League. They are committed to this because at the end of the day, and I think I mentioned this last time, they know that they're going to make their money back on this film because the film is not even the biggest profit center for the film. It's great when you can do a Deadpool and you can put in $50 million and get back $150 million or $600 million or $500 million, however much it's at right now, without doing a lot of thing. Although, with Deadpool, they don't have a lot of ancillary. So this is the ironic twist here. Because there aren't as many ancillaries for Deadpool, because you have to be careful on how you market it, because officially you're not marketing to kids because it's a quote-unquote rated R film. They have less ancillaries, so they're probably making less money on that, and they're making it all in ticket sales. Whereas when you make a broader film, you can make much more on the ancillaries, even if you wind up making less on ticket sales. Which brings me to my next and most important point of all this. Disney has come out and said, basically, as everyone else is saying, we're going to do the R-rated Superman, we're going to do the R-rated Wolverine, we're going to do Marvel's basically said, no, we have no plans for that. That is not what we do. And to me, this is brilliant for this very basic reason. Marvel understood the lesson of Deadpool before Deadpool came out. And the lesson that Marvel knows, and the lesson that Disney knows as well, is you don't follow the trend. If you have a source material that is beloved, or at least well-liked, you find people who like that source material. You let them make a film based on that source material where they care about the end product, and you create a product that people like. This sounds like common sense, but you have no idea how revolutionary this is for Hollywood. Mm-hmm. This idea that, what if we just made films that were good, and then people would go see them? Revolution! This is like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump combined. It's the new political revolution of, let's just make films that people want to see, and then maybe they'll go see them.
So basically what you're saying is, make a good story, and, if it calls for an R, give it an R, but, it doesn't... The rating isn't what makes it popular. It should be the story.
Well, exactly. And really, from Disney's point of view, it's like, really, we don't own any of the R-rated Marvel characters. Those are all over in the X-Men books, Not for nothing. It's like, your one R-rated character, your R-rated characters probably are Jessica Jones and the Punisher. Maybe Nick Fury. Really, when you come to, like, what are the max titles, it's like, Jessica Jones, the Punisher.
Yeah, but don't they have Ghost Rider and Blade back?
They do, and Blade was an R-rated film. Mm-hmm. So you know what? They may decide to make an R-rated Blade film or an R-rated Ghost Rider film if they decide that it's time to do that. The thing about and this is always this, and not for nothing. As we've said, there are always these complex questions about the Chinese market and the use of mysticism in the Chinese market, although it seems like the Chinese market is being more lenient on that because Kung Fu Panda 3 did get a big release in China, and that does have a lot of mystical qualities to it. So it could be that China's expanding itself with its fantasy worlds. At least by letting Kung Fu Panda in. But of course, when you're dealing with a controlled economy like China, you can't always make the argument that you should be allowed in because the other guy was allowed in, because of course it's not like it's a democratic system. It's not like there's checks and balances in China. It's the guy you're talking to, and that's the guy you have to deal with. And like in the U.S., you could make this whole complex argument, and you could go and find precedent and legality because we're a litigious society. And people usually use the term litigious. This is something my college civics teacher told me. Was like America is a litigious society, and sometimes people see that as a bad thing. But what that means is that Americans say, there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law about what we're doing. We should have a rule that is uniform and is clear for everybody. But when you get outside of the United States, when you get into countries that are controlled by less democratic means of rule, you don't have laws, you don't have rules, and you don't have a strict system by which things are regulated. But maybe that's changing in China because, of course, what does it really matter to China if people see a vampire? If people see a Master of the Mystic Arts? But we've already seen how they're really trying to dance on the Master of the Mystic Arts, Mm-hmm. That's why it's the Time Stone, not the Soul Stone. That's why the Soul Stone wasn't in Guardians. That was the Power Stone. Even though everything they did... Yeah, super science. Where's Thaddeus Venture when you need him? Anyway, this is but this is the crux of it. As we go through that, if you're telling a good story, people will like it. Even if you're telling stories with characters that are maybe not the most popular. And if you're telling stories with the most popular characters, you're probably going to make your money back. Mm-hmm. The truth of it is the odds of a film called Batman versus Superman not making its money back on a $200 million budget, which is a lot of money. Let's be honest, it's a lot of money. But you can make so much more money before anyone even sees the film.
Oh, yeah. T-shirts, toys. I mean, you go to Walmart, you see all these toys. I mean, I saw an ad. They have cereal now. It's...
Oh, yeah. General Mills paid good money to make Batman versus Superman cereal. Although, you know what bugs me about Batman versus Superman cereal? It's two different cereals. They're not together. To me, I want to get that Batman v Superman cereal of the caramel Superman crunches and the chocolate strawberry Batman crunches in one bowl. So I can either pick which ones I'm going to eat first or eat them all at once.
Well, that's how they're making their money back, Charlie. Since you want both, you got to buy both boxes.
Exactly. Unfortunately, I'm a grown-up and I don't buy sugar cereal anymore except for my kids. So, but I knew that if I was a kid and I had a box of Batman vs. Superman cereal, I would show my allegiance by whom I ate first. Or I would eat the Superman, then the Batman, it would be a game. It would be a whole thing, But it's, again, DC just leaving the money on the table. Because DC, as I've always said, the problem with DC is that they're not Disney. Disney knows this science because they've been doing it for 1,000 years now. And, it's all honestly, I will tell you that there are supercomputers underneath Disneyland that would put Brainiac to shame and are just cranking out thoughts on what is marketable exactly. How do you make a princess both heroic but feminine and crazy stuff like that? Disney does well, and which is why I honestly, and I've said that, it's I am a guy who always takes the counter view in the nerd community. When Disney bought Marvel, and I was like, oh, this is the end of Marvel. I'm like, no, this is the beginning of Marvel, because you can say what you want about Disney and what they do, but what Disney actually does is maintain characters, maintain stables of characters that are worth a lot of money. And they use them in ways that are both build the brand, build the character, and give you what you want from the character. Because, you don't make money forcing someone to buy something they don't want. Mm-hmm. If, as the old saying goes, nothing kills a bad product better than good advertising. Which, if you have a product that is not good, and everyone goes and tries it, it will destroy it. Because everyone's going to try and say, this was not good. Yeah. So, you can have the best brand in the world, but if you don't put a good product behind that brand, you're not going to sell. You're not going to make money off of it. Mm-hmm. And in this way, this is what I'll tell you is the strength of Disney Marvel, is that Marvel wasn't a good brand. Their best characters were elsewhere. But Disney said, but you've still got characters. You've still got things that we can use. Characters who are heroes. And I'm sure from Disney's point of view, it's we didn't need to buy Superman. We just needed heroes that existed so that everyone says that they're not manufactured heroes. If I'm going to put out an Iron Man or an Ant-Man or a Hulk, it doesn't matter that they're not the most famous characters in the universe. They just have to be a character we can use, Mm-hmm. It just has to be a uniform that has authenticity. Because as they say, once you can fake authenticity, you've got it made. And that's what Disney does. It's like, here's fake authenticity. Here's a character who existed before we created them, but now we're going to define them in a way that you're going to love, and that is going to make this really work well. It doesn't always translate when you get to the books because, of course, as we've said, Ant-Man has gone way downhill since the movie. But I can't even blame the movie at this point because it's like they've so made him worse than he ever was in the movie. It's like, I can see Paul, it's like you aspired for Ant-Man to be like Paul Rudd in this. It's like, can't you just be as smart as Paul Rudd was? It's... for those who aren't listening to the all-new Marvel Roundup, Ant-Man is not a good book.
So don't they have anyone over there for quality control? Be like, they don't have an expert who says the bulk has to be somewhat similar to the movies. I thought that was their plan anymore.
Well, you know what it is I think that they do let Marvel have a little bit of a free reign, and officially Ike Perlmutter's still there, and of course, as everyone on the internet knows, Ike Perlmutter is the devil. No, he's not the devil, but he apparently the internet seems to think that he is the cause of all the war. Basically, you know what? And this is actually something I wanted to get into. We like to have villains, and right now, Ike Perlmutter gets cast as the villain at Marvel. Anytime something goes bad, it's this was when with Josh Trank. And I made this point back when because we always got to come back to how bad Fantastic Four was. At this point when Fantastic Four came out, that, you'd read articles and those people that wanted to say that the problem was Josh Trank because they didn't like Josh Trank basically said it was Josh Trank's fault. People who want to say, no, Josh Trank is a hero, it was all the studio's fault. We always want to find a villain. We always want to find someone that we're going to blame for the problems we're seeing in the things we like. And to that extent, Ike Perlmutter often gets this role. Now, maybe some of it is deserved. I'm sure some of it is deserved. If I was the head of a billion-dollar company, I probably would make stupid decisions too. Because I'm the head of nothing, and I make stupid decisions all the time. I would make things that people would say, that's really not a cool way to be. But you know what? It was the decision I made, and I'm dealing with it, and I'm moving forward. I'm not going to dwell on my bad decisions. I'm going to try and move forward with my good decisions. So I'm not going to say that Ike Perlmutter is the devil, but there are those who would like to blame everything on him in the same way that people would like to blame everything on Stan Lee. And that was actually something I wanted to get to last week because, of course, Stan Lee, God bless him, he is still with us, and he is aging every day. He gets a little bit older every day. And he's cutting back his touring schedule. And, we all know that it's time to re-examine the legacy of Stan Lee. Here's what I'm going to say about Stan Lee. Stan Lee, to me, is the one guy in the whole conversation I want to trust. Not because I believe everything Stan Lee says about his role in creating the characters of Marvel Comics, but because Stan Lee is the only guy that actually gives credit to anyone else. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about it. It's like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, these guys, they tend to get really possessive in that very artsy kind of way of, I did this and everyone else was not a part of it. And this is my big thing with Jack Kirby, because everyone always knows Kirby was the creative force. Kirby created Thor. Kirby created the Fantastic Four. I actually don't think so. And the reason I come to this is because I have read stuff about Kirby, and you see Kirby. Basically, I think that Kirby was probably maybe much nicer when he was younger, but as things went more and more south for him, he started getting very angry about everything and started claiming more and more stuff for himself. Because I have read articles with Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, where Jack Kirby is starting to say that he created Captain America. And Joe Simon was like, no, actually, I drew the first picture of Captain America. I was the guy who created Captain America. And I was the guy who was writing Captain America. And this was before the Marvel method where I told you what to draw and then you drew it.
No.
You know, Stanley gets hurt by the Marvel method, which was Stanley would give a rough script or rough outline to the artist. The artist would draw the book, and then Stanley would write the story. Mm-hmm. And that gives this idea that the artist was doing most of the work. But in truth, you know, and this is where it gets into this questionable concept. Stanley's perspective on this is he came up with the ideas of the characters. He would give a rough plot, and he actually says, with Jack Kirby, I didn't even necessarily have to give him a plot. I just said, this is what they're doing. You know, I'd give him a couple lines that they're going to fight Dr. Doom this issue. And Stanley and Kirby would draw an issue of them fighting Dr. Doom, and then Stanley would write in what they were saying. And Stanley has always said that was the division of labor. Stanley never took more credit than that. But where Stanley pulls it back, he says, well, no, when it came up with what was the idea going to be, I came up with the idea. It was like, who were the Fantastic Four? I came up with what the Fantastic Four were. And you can say, well, you know, they're similar to the Challengers of I think it was called the Challengers of Death or Challengers of something. I forget. But Kirby had created another group that went up in a rocket, came back down, and were adventurers. And there are similarities to them. There's similarities between the X-Men and not Suicide Squad. What was that group?
Challenge. Wait. What the Challengers
with Robot
of the Unknown?
Man?
Doom Patrol.
Challengers of the Unknown. Doom Patrol, yeah. There's this tie between Doom Patrol and X-Men, and yes, and they are very similar. But then again, all these things have similar ties to things that came before them as well. You know, there are people that will point out that Superman is basically that there's old pulp heroes that are a lot like Superman, and there was an old pulp hero that was a little like Spider-Man. There was an old pulp hero that was, you know, that all these things get rehashed because when these guys were making them, they were just coming up with repositioning classic icons, classic ideas in new ways. And here's the thing that I'm going to say. This is what puts the lie to all the artists who want to say Stan Lee did nothing. Both Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko say they created Spider-Man. Stan Lee says he created Spider-Man. Jack Kirby drew a book for Spider-Man that Stan Lee rejected. Steve Ditko drew a book for Spider-Man that Stan Lee accepted. If we are going to go with the idea that Stan Lee was the guy who created Spider-Man, then that's the only way that both Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby could say they created Spider-Man. Because Stan Lee must have created the basic concept of teenage superhero gets spider powers, goes and deals with this stuff. Because otherwise, Jack Kirby's Spider-Man isn't going to be anything like Steve Ditko's Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. And Steve Ditko's is not going to be anything like Jack Kirby's. And you're not going to be able to say, oh, well, you know, when I did it, you know, Jack Kirby had him as the star football player who gets the spider bite and, you know, beats up bad guys. And Steve Ditko had it as the little scrawny kid who gets the spider bite and beats up bad guys. But I think what is most likely the case is that Stan Lee came up with this idea like, okay, so a teenager gets bit by a spider. What's he going to do? Probably go on TV because, you know, if I was a teenager and I had superpowers, maybe I'd go on TV. I wouldn't necessarily be the first. Fighting bad guys might not be my first inclination. And that, I think, is where we get what is Stan Lee, is that he comes up with these ideas that aren't necessarily the traditional comic book mold. And that's the thing, is like when you look at these other guys, are guys that were steeped in the traditional comic book mold. Steeped in what the language of it was, which is why Stan Lee rejected Jack Kirby's Spider-Man, because he said when Jack Kirby drew it, he drew them all too too much. It was too heroic, and he didn't want it to look that heroic. And that's when he gave it to Ditko. So that tells you that there was something in what Stan Lee wanted that wasn't in what Jack Kirby was delivering for it, and he wanted something that was a little more, that was smaller, that was more strange, maybe, that was this young kid with superpowers, and I think that's definitely what Steve Ditko was able to deliver. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, is that Stan Lee doesn't sit there and say, I was the only guy a part of it. He always says, even though he says he created Spider-Man, he says the artists were always a part of it. And Stan Lee was always the guy talking up the artists, talking up the colorists and the letterers. And you know how I feel about letterers. I love a good letterer. We just got through that in talking about Swamp Thing on World's Finest. Go listen to the marvelous review on World's Finest, and you will know that I do love a good letterer. And Stan Lee was the guy who was like, yeah, that letterer, look at the way he's drawing those letterers, lightning lettering by whoever was doing lettering in the 1960s, and Stan Lee spoke up these people, said these guys were important. Now, yes, when it came to money, Stan Lee got the money and other people didn't get the money. Unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily Stan Lee's issue, because, of course, Stan Lee was never the money guy at Marvel. He was the guy who was the hype man at Marvel. And he was also the guy who was the businessman at Marvel and the hatchet man at Marvel, but he never really got to sign the paychecks, Mm-hmm. And I think that basically what happened was there was a lot of times when Stan Lee had to be the hatchet man, and people got bad feelings about that. And he was the guy and Stan Lee always looked out for Stan Lee. So people got upset about that because Stan Lee was a better businessman. Although Stan Lee will say, actually, I really wasn't as good of a businessman as I could have been because I didn't get a piece of all my characters. And that's the thing, is that Stan Lee didn't own the rights to any of these characters. But what Stan Lee did do was he built himself up as a person, that he created this iconic character of Stan Lee that became problematic for the Marvel industry, that if you didn't have Stan Lee being there giving you the thumbs up, and he was happy to give you the thumbs up for a buck or two, but if he wasn't there to give you the thumbs up, you couldn't make the film, you couldn't make the TV show, you couldn't make the comic book, and you can hate him for that, but really, it's not like anyone was stopping Jack Kirby from being the Glad-Hander except for Jack Kirby, and of course this is one of the basic problems with being an artist and being a businessman. And it's every so often you'll get a guy like Stan Lee who can be a decent artist and a decent businessman, although will always be judged poorly as both by other people, and truth be told, Stan Lee, he revolutionized comics, but he was not necessarily the greatest comic writer ever, but he did revolutionize it, and things that he created eventually became cliche, and then nowadays when he writes something, it may seem a bit more cliche than innovative because he already did all his innovating. It's that catch-22 of innovation. You can be the Young Turk. There's a great book called Young Turks and Old Masters, which is about the difference between people who, when they're youthful, have their greatest moments, and when they are older, have their greatest moments. And I think that is actually really relevant here. Because, of course, when Stan Lee was coming into the industry, all the other guys like Jack Kirby, they were already seasoned masters. Jack Kirby was an old master when Stan Lee was a young Turk. And I think, and I guarantee you that Stan Lee would be the first to say this, that merging of the two together was a perfect blend, that you got this young Turk coming in with these bold ideas and this old master who could direct them to something great. And that was good, that made something iconic. And, the problem only comes in with the fact that, well, Stan Lee is up there as the big star, talking up everybody, but still the guy up front, because he was the guy up front, he was the guy in that position. Jack Kirby used to be editor-in-chief of Marvel, but then things changed, and it wound up being this kid, because he was this young dumb kid, this copy boy, Stanley Lieber, who was the nephew of the publisher, and gets stuck in this position. But then, because he's stuck in this position, he decides, well, let's take some risks. And he's the young Turk, and he brings in Kirby. But of course, people get bitter when they're not the ones in the center. And it's sad that there was so much negativity about it. But at the end of the day, I've always been of the guy. I'm really honestly of the belief. Stan Lee says that there was some reconciliation between the two of them at the end. We don't really know. I don't know if the bitterness was as big as people have always said. Because at the end of the day, Jack Kirby comes back to Marvel. He leaves. And this is the thing about the industry: is people come in, they go out. But at the end of the day, this is the industry. People all got to work together. And, to me, I'd rather believe, rather than being this battle of egos, that it was just petty stuff that got put aside when stuff needed to get done. And, I don't know what the legacy of Stan Lee is going to be. I'm sure that the internet will always see him as a hack, and to me, it's always like Tesla and Edison. People will always be down on Edison and see Tesla as something fantastic. But at the end of the day, the results were Edison created and Tesla dreamed. And, Jack Kirby certainly created. But I think that when Jack Kirby was paired with Stan Lee, when Steve Ditko was paired with Stan Lee, when all of these guys were with Stan Lee, I think they created something so much better. And I think that if you take Stan Lee out of that equation, you lose something. You lose what makes Marvel Marvel. And I think you lose what makes the modern comics industry is the comics industry. I don't think without Stan Lee, this is what I'll always say, for all the stuff that Stan Lee gets about underselling creators, I think Stan Lee was the guy who oversold creators. I think he was in many ways the victim of his own hype, is that he said, these are the guys that are making this book with me. These are the guys that are important to this book. And then everyone said, well, if they're so important, then you must not be important. You must just be this hype man, and you don't really belong here. And it's like, no, that's my feeling. And of course, this is based on knowing no one, getting second-hand, third-hand information, and with some great love for Stan Lee, because I was a young kid growing up on Marvel and seeing Stan Lee Presents. And, to me, he will always be the founding father of comics. But like all founding fathers, I'm sure he had his flaws, Jefferson owned slaves, as did George Washington, but that does not make them not great men. You can be a great man and be flawed. And if there's one thing we should ever learn from the universe in which we live and the history in which we live, it's that even great men can be flawed. And in fact, I think the greatest men will always have something in their closet that will have us tear them down if we so desire. But we should always remember that what makes them great men isn't the flaw, it's the greatness in spite of the flaw. And that's my thought on connections for this week. Do you have any thoughts for this week, Phil?
Well, just to finish that up, 1, Excelsior. 2, I don't know if we got the whole story. I think Stan Lee needs to come on and have a chat with us.
I'm always welcome. Always welcoming you to Stan Lee. Come here. Although I don't think we can afford him, because the man likes to get paid, and I don't blame him. Yes, got to get to Canada. That's where his last appearance is. I gotta get enough money to get to his last appearance. I think it's in Calgary. I gotta look that up again. But there's like his last appearance. Of course, he'll probably come back and do one more con after that. and then one more kind of after that. But like do it like once a year. So you always, this is this is only appearance this year, but like officially his last. The end of the tour schedule is like it is in like Alberta or Calgary or something like that. And so I got to get to it, man.
He's going to be the Rolling Stones. He's going to have a farewell tour every year.
Well, the guy is 93. He can only have so many more farewell tours. Unless he got a hold of that infinity formula, which I hope, I honestly and sincerely hope in my heart he has. If anyone I want to have the infinity formula right now, it's Stanley. Just so I can get to meet the man. Okay. But yes, we should get Stanley on it and really talk to him about this. So Stan, have your people call my people, which is me.
I was going to say you or me, yeah.
Yeah. Really, Phil's my people. People like to talk to him much more than me. But Stan, reach out to us. I love you, and I'm going to give you a Donald Trump-worthy interview where it's just all softballs. Phil, I can't promise for. Phil likes DC, so he may have it out for you. But I'll be there to protect you, Stan. Come on, we'll have a good interview.
No, I love Stanley.
Yes. Okay, so I do think that's our. Yeah. So Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. coming back for season 4. Hooray! And Agent Carter, we don't know yet, but fingers crossed. Okay, so that's that. Kids, connect with us again. If you would like to reach out to me, you can always tweet with me for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Legends of Tomorrow sometimes, other things, but really Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because DC shows come on at 8, and man, no offense DC shows, you're too violent. I got kids in this house. But Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. we'll watch together because that's on at 9 when my kids are asleep. But you can tweet with me at Charlie Esser. That's CharlieEsser. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. And of course, write to me with your thoughts at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. And Philip, if they do need to talk to you, to commiserate with you, to complain to you about me, or to tell you how much that they think that Jack Kirby was the brilliant man and Stanley the piker, how can they do that?
Well, if you want to talk to me about Charlie Esser, a.k.a. the Stan Lee of the Southgate Media Group, you can always email me, nightwingpdp@gmail.com, and on Twitter, I am at nightwingpdp, where I live tweet occasionally myself. So,
yes, and no, I'm not the Stan Lee. That would be our beloved founder, Rob Southgate. He is our hero. We all serve him. Don't get me fired, man. I get the feeling he's got a temper. Start saying I'm important, and he's gonna I'll get rid of them all.
He does say enough said every week. So, maybe he has
enough said. Yes. Okay, anyway, say some more with us. It's not enough. It's never enough said on Superconnectivity. Good night, everybody.